Meet Chris, a talented photographer with an eye for detail who's head over heels for his girlfriend Rose. They're an interracial couple navigating life together, their bond stronger than any prejudices they might face. When Rose suggests it's time for Chris to meet her parents, their story takes an interesting turn. Though Rose insists her parents are progressive, Chris can't help but feel those familiar butterflies of anxiety. Before embarking on their weekend getaway, he checks in with his best friend Rod, an airport security officer who's watching his dog. Little does Chris know, this seemingly ordinary family visit is about to become anything but normal. Arriving at Rose's family estate, Chris steps into a world of luxury. Her father, Dean, a distinguished neurosurgeon, and mother, Missy, a renowned psychiatrist, greet him with picture-perfect smiles. During Dean's grand tour of their impressive home, Chris notices something peculiar. Both the housekeeper, Georgina, and groundskeeper, Walter, are African-American, and there's something strange about their behavior. Dean quickly explains they're practically family, inherited staff from his parents who he couldn't bear to let go. But Chris can't shake the feeling that something's not quite right. As they settle in for some porch-side conversation, the family mentions an upcoming party, keeping things light until Chris opens up about losing his mother in a childhood car accident. The mood shifts, and suddenly Dean's suggesting hypnosis therapy when he spots Chris's smoking habit. The afternoon takes an unsettling turn when Georgina serves tea, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. There's something mechanical about her movements, a discordant note in her carefully composed demeanor. But before Chris can process this, Missy dismisses her with an abruptness that feels just wrong. Enter Jeremy, Rose's brother, who crashes dinner with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. He turns what should be a family meal into an uncomfortable interrogation, fixating on Chris's physical capabilities with an almost predatory interest. His comments about black genetic superiority send red flags flying, and when he suddenly lurches up, itching for a fight, the dining room crackles with tension. Only Rose's parents' swift intervention prevents total chaos. Finding refuge in Rose's room later, the couple shares a moment of honesty. Rose apologizes for her family's bizarre behavior, which is teetering dangerously close to outright racism. But the night has more surprises in store. Unable to sleep and craving a cigarette, Chris steps outside for some fresh air. That's when things get seriously weird. Walter, the groundskeeper, comes sprinting out of the darkness like an Olympic athlete. Shaken, Chris turns to see something equally disturbing. Georgina standing motionless before a mirror, adjusting her reflection with an eerie, trance-like precision. Just when Chris thinks the night can't get any stranger, he stumbles upon Missy in her therapy room. The soft lamplight creates dancing shadows as she stirs her tea, the spoon's rhythmic clicking against china becoming hypnotically intense. Her questions about his mother's death feel invasive, probing at old wounds. Yet somehow, with each gentle clink of that spoon, Chris finds himself unable to resist sharing his deepest, most painful memories. In a terrifying twist, Missy's hypnotic power takes hold. Chris finds himself trapped in what she chillingly calls the sunken place, a void where he's conscious but completely powerless, sinking deeper and deeper into the darkness of his own mind. When Chris snaps awake in Rose's bed the next morning, his phone shows a missed message from Rod. He desperately wants to write off the whole experience as just another nightmare, but something feels different. With his phone nearly dead, he puts it on charge and grabs his camera, hoping photography might help clear his troubled mind. Outside, Chris attempts to break the ice with Walter, but the conversation only adds to his unease. Something's seriously wrong with the groundskeeper. He speaks like he stepped straight out of a 1950s country club, complete with dated mannerisms that seem completely out of place. When Walter casually mentions Missy's hypnosis session, Chris's blood runs cold. It wasn't a dream after all. He rushes to tell Rose, who seems surprisingly casual about her mother's unauthorized therapy session. Even more unsettling, Chris realizes he no longer craves cigarettes. But before he can process this revelation, guests start arriving for the family's annual gathering, and that's when things get really weird. The party turns into a parade of uncomfortable moments as wealthy white guests openly gawk at Chris. Their comments range from cringeworthy to straight-up racist, from inappropriate questions about his bedroom prowess to treating his skin color like it's this season's hottest fashion trend. Feeling like he's on display in some twisted museum exhibit, Chris retreats behind his camera lens, trying to make sense of the increasingly bizarre situation. The party takes another bizarre turn when Chris encounters Logan King, another black guest who seems to have stepped out of a time machine. His mannerisms are so dated, it's like watching an old film reel come to life. The only guest who seems halfway normal is Jim Hudson, a blind art curator who skips the awkward race talk in favor of genuine interest in Chris's photography. Overwhelmed by the carnival of oddities, Chris heads upstairs for a breather. What he doesn't know is that the moment he leaves, an eerie silence falls over the party below, like someone hit a collective mute button. Upstairs, his suspicions kick into overdrive when he discovers his phone charger mysteriously unplugged. A glimpse of Georgina in the hallway suggests she might be the culprit. Desperate for a reality check, Chris calls Rod, who cracks a wild theory about white people hypnotizing black folks into sex slaves. Chris laughs it off, but the joke hits a little too close to his mounting unease. When he tries connecting with Georgina about the awkwardness of being surrounded by white people, something strange happens. Her composed facade cracks, tears stream down her face as she robotically insists the Armitages are like family, but her eyes, they're screaming something entirely different. The situation spirals when Chris spots Logan downstairs. Something about him seems hauntingly familiar, so Chris snaps a quick photo to send to Rod. But the flash triggers something unexpected. Logan's nose starts bleeding, and suddenly he's a different person entirely. "Get out!" he screams, lunging at Chris with wild eyes and desperation in his voice. The outburst sends shockwaves through the party, though Dean tries to brush it off like it's just another party game gone wrong. Rose, sensing Chris's growing distress, suggests they escape for a walk, but the damage is done. Chris has seen too much to ignore, and every instinct is screaming that something is terribly, terribly wrong in this picture-perfect estate. While Chris and Rose walk in the woods, something sinister unfolds back at the house. The Armitage family runs a twisted auction with Chris as the prize. In a chilling twist, Jim Hudson, the seemingly friendly blind art curator, places the winning bid. As Chris opens up to Rose about his unsettling experiences since the hypnosis, his friend Rod makes a horrifying discovery. The photo Chris sent? That's not Logan. It's Andre Hayworth, a missing person who once dated their friend. Rod's frantic warning gets cut short when Chris's phone dies at the worst possible moment. Desperate to escape, Chris tells Rose they need to leave immediately. She agrees, heading downstairs for their things. But fate has one more cruel revelation in store. A partially open closet door catches Chris's eye, and what he finds inside shatters his world. Photographs, dozens of them, each showing Rose with different black men, including Walter and Georgina. The terrible truth crashes down. Chris isn't Rose's first target. He's just the latest in a long line of victims. When Rose returns, everything changes. Her search for the missing car keys feels like a performance now. As they reach the foyer, Chris's worst fears materialize. The entire family stands waiting. Jeremy guards the door like a sentinel, Missy clutches her infamous teacup, and Dean watches with calculated calm. As Chris begs Rose to find the keys, Dean launches into an unsettling monologue about brilliant white minds and suitable vessels. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Rose, the woman Chris trusted and loved, drops her mask. The sweet, understanding girlfriend vanishes, revealing a cold-blooded accomplice in her family's horrific scheme. Before Chris can process this betrayal, Missy's teacup clinks, that haunting sound sending him spiraling into paralysis. Helpless, he watches through frozen eyes as they drag him toward the basement, where unimaginable horrors await. Back in the city, Rod's worry turns to terror as his calls go unanswered. His investigation uncovers Andre Hayworth's missing person report, confirming his darkest fears. Meanwhile, Chris regains consciousness in a basement nightmare, strapped to a chair, facing a flickering TV screen. Rose's grandfather appears in a recorded message, delivering a bone-chilling truth. Chris was targeted for his genetic advantages. Before he can process this horror, the hypnotic sound of stirring tea sends him spiraling back into darkness. Rod's desperate attempt to save his friend leads him to the police, but his warnings about a white family abducting black people fall on deaf ears. The officer's dismissive laughter echoes through the precinct, leaving Rod alone with his terrifying knowledge. When Chris awakens again, Jim Hudson's face fills the screen, calmly explaining the Armitage's monstrous enterprise, transplanting aging white minds into young black bodies. But Jim's particular interest in Chris is gut-wrenching. He wants Chris's photographer's eyes, condemning Chris to eternal. He stuffs his ears with cotton from the chair, blocking the hypnotic tea-stirring trigger. When Jeremy arrives to escort him to his doom, Chris unleashes hell. A well-aimed lacrosse ball sends Jeremy crashing down. The mounted deer head becomes an unlikely weapon of salvation as Chris impales Dean, spilling his blood across the pristine floor. A fallen candle sets the operating room ablaze. Racing upstairs, Chris confronts Missy in a heart-stopping showdown. He knocks away her infamous teacup, but she retaliates with savage desperation, driving something sharp through his palm. In the brutal struggle that follows, Chris's survival instinct takes over. With one decisive move, he turns Missy's weapon against her, plunging it into her eye. Just as freedom beckons at the front door, Jeremy emerges like a bloody specter, trapping Chris in a crushing headlock. But Chris's survival instinct kicks in. A strategic stab to the shin and a brutal stomp to the head leaves Jeremy permanently out of commission. Meanwhile, upstairs, Rose lounges in disturbing serenity, scrolling through photos of potential victims while listening to music, completely detached from the carnage below. Chris finally grabs the car keys and makes his break for freedom, but fate throws one last cruel twist. He accidentally hits Georgina with the car. The echo of his mother's tragic hit-and-run death haunts him, compelling him to do what she never received: help. But this act of compassion proves devastating when Rose appears, rifle in hand, revealing a horrifying truth. Georgina and Walter are actually her grandparents, their consciousness trapped in stolen black bodies. In a terrifying turn, Georgina attacks Chris, their struggle ending in a violent crash that claims her life. As Chris stumbles from the wreckage, Walter, or rather Rose's grandfather controlling him, launches a savage assault. In a moment of desperate brilliance, Chris deploys his camera flash, momentarily freeing Walter's true consciousness. In that split second of clarity, Walter grabs the rifle, shoots Rose, and then turns the weapon on himself, ending the family's reign of horror. Despite everything Rose has done, Chris can't bring himself to finish her off. As police sirens pierce the night air, his heart sinks until he recognizes the familiar shape of an airport security vehicle. Behind the wheel is Rod, his best friend turned savior, arriving just in time to rescue Chris from this suburban nightmare. As they drive away, leaving Rose bleeding out in the street, Chris finally lets out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The nightmare is over, but its effects will linger forever. A chilling reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters wear friendly smiles and live in picture-perfect homes.